name's Sean Tucker, and as part of my day job, I shoot products for companies. And there's a lot online that you can find about how to shoot small products on tabletops with a white background and just some speed lights, but there's not a lot to show you how to shoot something large like a sofa or a bed or a dining set. So I want to give you some basic tips and tricks for companies who are confused about how do you get good images of your products so that you can get them loaded onto your website for sale. In part one, I'm going to show you how do you light your product and what kind of camera settings you use. Part two, I'm going to show you how to cut that product out onto a white background. And then part three, I'm going to show you how you can recolor your product. Maybe you're someone who makes sofas and you've got 20, 30 different color options of your fabric. You want to be able to take those shots that you've spent loads of time over shooting that one sofa and recolor it to all your different color options. So you've got uniform shots across your site, but in all your different color variations. So these are just some basic tips and tricks on how you can shoot your large products well and load them onto your website. Okay, so in the first episode we've shot our product on a white background in the studio. We've worked on lighting a little bit and we've got our camera settings correct. And now we're going to bring the images into the computer and we're going to go through them. We're going to select images, change some levels and balances on it, and then we're going to export, cut out onto a white background and use some of the drop shadow that we created with those lights to put back onto that white background so it gives it some context. So here we go, we've got everything imported into Lightroom. You can see our images running down. You can see a lot of the lighting tests I was doing here where we were turning lights on one at a time where it was slightly bright. The one I want to look for is with the grey card in it, which is here, image 10. And if I go into this image and then I move from library over to develop here at the top, and I just select this this eyedropper tool, which is our white balance selection tool, and I just want to click on our grey card here. Okay, you can see, so it takes a lot of the yellow out of the image. We might not have been able to see it with the naked eye, but actually that image was way too yellow, and that could be anything. It could be to do with the camera, it could be to do with the lights, but that grey card just ensures that we snap everything back to the color that it should be. So once we've got that first image correct, we're going to go back over to our library. We're going to hit Command or Control on a PC and A. That's going to select all our images. We're going to come down here to Sync Settings. Let's just go check none, and then we only want white balance checked, and we're going to come down here to process version, which means it's going to take the white balance correction we've just made and apply it to all our images. If we hit synchronize and give it a second, you're going to watch these images start to change, and that's going to make sure that our color is more true than perhaps it would have been otherwise. That's just dialing through all over there. You can see them slowly starting to change down that list. There we go. Okay. So while it's doing that, let's just hit Command and select one of these images. We want to go through and we want to just select the images we want to edit. Not everything in here is obviously stuff we want to edit. There's a lot of tests in here and the rest of it. So let's just use our arrow keys and cycle through and have a look which are the ones we want to use. So we only want to go after this black frame because that's the one we used just to test that none of the lighting in the room was affecting our product. 15 looks pretty good. So let's select that. Obviously you can change your thumbnail size here at the bottom if you want to just zoom in a bit closer and see what you're looking at. But this should be fine. I remember pretty much what we shot. So 15 looks good. That gives us our kind of 7/8 shot with a bit of an angle to show off the shape of the chair. We had a front-on shot and I think 20 looks good. Okay, our legs, we started off a bit dark and I moved around, dialed the light up a little bit. We'll probably have to bring it back down a bit, but let's just select this one for now. Let's rate that one 4. And what I'm doing is each time I like an image that I want to edit, I'm just hitting 4 on my keyboard, and that gives it a 4-star rating out of 5. Just a way to select which images I actually want to work on and not. So 28, I'm going to hit 4. Like 30, I'm going to hit 4 there. These corners, just to show off those brass studs, maybe 35 is good. Usually the last image in a batch is the one where I got the lighting dialed in by then, so that's usually where I'll have a look, and if it's not correct I'll look at some of the others. I've just shot the back on 39, which is quite nice just to give it, I like 38, slightly less exposed. Star that 4. 43 looks good, and 45. So that gives us a selection, hopefully the best versions of each of the angles that we took. If we come down here to the bottom right corner, and if I just go to filter here and go down to rated, that's just going to isolate the images that we've rated. Now we've got a few duplicates in here. We've got, say for example, 4 and 8 are showing the same kind of thing, and I prefer 4. So let me just select 8 and hit 0, and that's just going to rate it to 0 and knock it out of that pool. And 5 and 8 are also looking very similar. So let's just select, I think I prefer 8 just because it's less exposed. Nope, I prefer 5. It's showing more of the buttons. So let's just select 8 and hit 0, and that's going to get rid of 8. So now we've got 7 images which we're going to work with and export. A 7/8 angle, front on, a shot, close-up shot of the leg, this side stitching here, close-up shot of the buttons, close-up shot of these brass studs here, and then just a shot of the back on its own as well to show what the back of that chair looks like. Let's start by double-clicking on our first image. And a lot of people are going to try and get their images right in Lightroom. That's not really what I'm trying to do. This isn't going to be a final version. I want to play with my exposure to get it sitting correctly, and then I want to bring back the details and the highlights and shadows to make sure that I've got as much information to work with as possible when I get to the recoloring stage. So just looking at this, I probably want to dial this exposure down a touch on this image just to maintain all those highlights, maybe -10, not too much. And then I want to bring these highlight sliders down, maybe to -8. And that's going to ensure that I've got all my detail in those sliders, if I've got my exposure correct. And on my shadow slider, I just want to go +8. And what I'm doing is I'm taking the highlights down, the shadows up. It's almost flattening out the image and taking some of the contrast out. We can add it back later, but it's just to keep as much of that detail as possible. And if we scroll down here, there's one last thing I want to do. It's not very much I need to do in Lightroom. I just want to hit Enable Profile Corrections, and what this does is it reads the lens that I took this shot with, which was the 70-200 f4, and it knows shooting at 70mm there's going to be a slight bit of barrel distortion, which is just sort of bulging the product perhaps a little bit because of the way the lens is set up. This reads that lens and applies a distortion correction, so it flattens that image back out and also takes out any vignetting from that lens as well. So watch what this does. See, it just flattens that out again. So now we know that our product isn't distorted, it's going to look as is. I want to just apply those corrections across the board. So here we've got our thumbnails along the bottom. I'm just going to, first image is selected, I'm just going to go to the last image, hold shift and click. They're all selected now, and I want to go to sync. And with sync selected, I'm just going to add on basic tone here and lens correction, and that's going to include what we've already done. I can take off white balance if I want because I've already done that, and hit synchronize, and that'll apply those changes across the board for those images. Okay, let's go to our second image. The only thing I need to check now is going through is if some were slightly brighter or softer, I need to just individually dial in the exposure for each of those images. So going to the second image here, we've made those global corrections, but perhaps it needs to come down a touch in exposure. So that's fine, we'll take that down to 20. Okay, the third image needs to come down quite a bit in exposure. This is why we just go through and check each one. I would say 50, -50 is looking good. I think the fourth image, maybe a touch as well. We want to also see good separation with that background. That's looking good. I think 5 is looking maybe a touch over as well, -20. It's looking better. Okay, that's looking good. The sixth image here is looking good. The top might be a touch over, but it's fine because we want to focus on these sides anyway. That's where we want the attention to be. So let's keep all the detail in here with these studs. And then this last image may be also down a little touch because on the back there it's looking a little overexposed. Okay, so we've made those corrections to our images. Again, we want to Command A or Control A on a Windows computer. Select them all. We're going to go File, Export. And we're just going to put them in a subfolder on our desktop called Studio Chairs, and scroll down, and we're going to make sure it's JPEG, 100% quality, and Adobe RBG, and hit export. Okay, so we've exported all our images onto our desktop. Let's bring the first one into Photoshop. So we're going to go File, Open, once we're in Photoshop here. Here's our Studio Chairs shot. Let's pick the first one here, this 7/8 angle, and select and open. And there we go, popped into Photoshop. Okay, now looking at the chair, there's a few things we want to do first. We just want to do some basic retouches just to tidy up some untidy edges, maybe some faults in the chair, little scratches on the wood. We just want to do all the cleanup before we start to do the cutout. So for non-destructive editing, and all that means is that you can always go back to the start if you need to. You want to duplicate your background layer. So your original photo is always underneath everything in case you need to backtrack. With that duplicated layer selected, the first thing we want to do is to liquefy. And that's just to straighten some of these edges that are looking a little untidy around here. So if we go to Filter, Liquefy, what we want to do is hit this little top nudge tool at the top. It's called the Forward Warp tool. And with our brush, like the selected, we've got our square bracket keys on our keyboard, and that's going to change the size of that brush. And the important rule you need to remember is you basically need to have the brush size the same size as the curve you're trying to correct, or the warp that you're trying to correct. And what that means is you're going to correct that in as few moves as possible. If you've got a tiny little brush here and you're trying to correct edges, you're going to start to get little jagged bits all over the place, which isn't great. So you want to make sure that that brush is the same size curve as whatever your curve happens to be that you're trying to fix. So let's start here. We just want to see, like here, there's a little bump here which is quite annoying. So let's start to take that out here. And all you're doing is you're putting the center of that circle on the top of that curve, and you're just pulling it back into shape. So here we can pull this up as well. Same size brush as the curve we're trying to correct, and as few moves as possible. The more moves you make, the more of a mess you're going to start to make of those edges. Same size there. We just want to drag that back up. That's looking good. Obviously chairs are lumpy. They're not meant to be perfect straight lines, I don't think. So you know, you're not going to correct everything, but just things that you think are distracting or take the focus away, or sort of draw the eye to the wrong part of the image. I'm just going to straighten out that edge as well, just for this curve to be a bit smoother on that side as well. And then if we head down to the bottom of the image here, you can see this front edge here is looking quite jagged. So let's work on this a little bit as well. Same thing, circle the same size as the curve you're working on, and as few moves as possible. We're just straightening these edges out. That's not looking too bad now. Let's just work on this little bit here as well. It's looking alright. And maybe this little piece here at the back, let's drag that a little bit in, make that curve a little smoother. And that's looking pretty good. Okay, so we don't want to do too much there, but that already looks a little bit better. Let's hit OK. If we turn this layer on and off here, we can sort of see what we've done. We've just kind of straightened out some of those distracting pieces. Still looks like a lumpy, inviting chair, but we haven't. We've taken out some of those distractions. Okay, the next thing we want to do is, if you look in close here, you can see that there's a bit of messy material that's sitting in front of that wood there, which doesn't look very attractive. So we want to take that out. Let's create a new layer, just by clicking Create New Layer button here at the bottom, and we're going to go in and we're going to start to clone. What we want to make sure that we do first is create a safe zone we can clone in without worrying about the edge. So the best way to do that is using the pen tool, and we're going to use this a lot in a second, so I'll explain it a little bit more. But basically you want to just left click on the line that you want to create, and then click again for the second line you want to create, but hold and drag, and what that's going to do is create a curve for you. And then you want to move this little end here by holding Alt. It's going to turn into a little arrow when you select it, and drag it into the direction you want to move next. There are loads of tutorials about how to use the pencil, so I'm not going to spend too much time in this tutorial, but then this will give you an idea. So we've got a line across the top there. We're going to drag for this one here. You can see the angle's not great. We want it to be a sharper angle up here. In fact, let's backtrack a little bit because we want that to be a sharp edge. So let's hold that there. We're going to click and drag for this curve here, and along the bottom we don't need to worry about too much because we're not going to be cloning down here. So what we've done is created a path. We're going to right click in the middle and go Make Selection, and that's going to give you a bounding box to make sure that you're not cloning outside of that box. We're going to come to our clone tool, and I'll show you why this is important now. Again, bracket keys, square bracket keys to change the size of the brush. And what we want to do now is clone from areas of similar tone. You can see there's a little bit of a shadow here that we want to keep going. So we need to clone from this upwards to keep the shape going, and the same all round. So let's hold Alt, and we're just going to select that brush there, that little bit of shadow. And now we're just going to move up, and we're going to brush up like so. And what that's going to do is when I get to the top, because I've created that bounding box, it means that I'm not going to move into the material at the top, and it's going to stop me before I start getting out of shape there at the top. And just select all over, just Alt click to select, and then you're going to move around the product, just cloning as you go. Alt to select and clone above. There we go. So we're just moving around, selecting and cloning in, and you can see there it's nice and neatly just sort of holding us within bounds there, so we're not cloning wood on top of our material and making a new mess. Make mistakes, don't worry, you're just going to go over it again. Just keep going around, just estimating as best as you can, trying to sort of hold the shape or tone of that wood as best you can. Start over here, and it's starting to look a little bit better. Don't worry about the little mistakes we can see. Again, right here at the edge, we want the highlight there on the edge to meet the highlight at the top there. You can see I made a little mistake here, so just let's head back and try it a little bit neater. There we go. Okay, and if we zoom out a little bit, we can see we've got a little bit of a funny shadow going on here. Let's just select a big brush. We've got a nice soft edge on this here. You can see it's at 0%, so it's nice and soft. It's not going to affect us too much, and what I think I'm going to do is just clone from here and drag across there and sweep. Okay, so that's looking a lot better. What we can do is if we turn, let's just Command D to deselect that and turn that level, that layer on and off there, and we can see what we've done. We're not going to worry too much about these bits sticking over into the white because we're going to cut that out anyway, but we can see over that wood there, it's now looking like a nice, neat selection by that fabric. If we scroll across here, I think this other front leg here had a similar kind of issue, so let's go in here and do the same. And I'm just going to speed this up for time's sake. Okay, so we finished up that left leg as well. If we turn them both on and off now, we can see we've got rid of that material hanging underneath. Like I say, everything that's hanging off the white we're not going to worry about just yet. Okay, next thing we want to do is to get rid of some of the scratches. I noticed some scratches on this wood, especially on the legs here. So let's just come up to our healing brush here. Tool, which is on the left hand side in our toolbar, and we've just selected a new layer as well, so we're doing everything as far as possible on a separate layer, so we can always go back and fix if we need to. If you want to be fastidious about it, it's probably a good idea to label what each of these layers are. So we'd call this one cloning, and we call this layer 2, we call this healing brush, just so we can keep a track of what we're doing. And if I could type, that would be helpful. Okay, oh, I think you know what I mean. So there we go, we've got that all selected. We're going to come down here, you can see this right on this lip here of this turned leg, you can see that it's got a bit of a scratch there. So just with our healing brush selected, we're going to, for some reason it's not giving me the circle around this brush. I don't know if you get this problem as well, but we'll still be able to use it. And usually there should be a circle around this icon. Maybe someone could put in a comment why this happens. But just with a small brush selected, we're going to hit Alt over here. We're going to just brush over, just from a similar area we're cloning from. And it's sort of like a clone, but instead of cloning everything, color and everything else included, it's just taking out areas of big difference. So here we can see the scratch here. We're going to just select from here, and we're just going to brush over that scratch. You see it's going to disappear and blend back into the background. Here on this leg, we're just going to take that again from a similar area of tone. We're going to Alt select there, and then we're going to get rid of maybe this little scratch here. Alt select from here and just brush. Okay, that's looking alright. And we're going to head across to the other leg where I think there was some similar issues as well. Yep. So here we're going to Alt select here and just brush over that scratch there again. This healing brush, same on here. Similar areas of tone. Let's scroll up a little bit. Okay, we've got a little bit here, and then if we scroll across, we've got quite a big one here, and this looks like an imperfection in the wood, but it's worth getting rid of as well. So I've just made my brush size slightly bigger. I'm just going to brush over that as well, slightly smaller, and we'll get rid of this last little bit here as well. And that's looking better. So this would work for fabric mistakes you've got as well. If you've got a tear in the fabric, you can probably either clone to fix it from an area it's exactly the same, or try this healing brush technique. So we've done some of the retouching that's necessary now. It's looking fairly good, and we're going to go ahead and do our cutout now. So to do that, we need to hold Command, Alt, and Shift and E if you're using a Mac. Otherwise, it's going to be Control, Alt, Shift, and E. And what that does is create a stamped visible layer, which means it takes everything you can see, squashes it into one flat layer, and puts it above everything that you're working on. So this layer 1 now is our stamped visible layer. And this is what we're going to use to cut out our actual chair from. So just so that we've got something to work with underneath, we're going to go down here and create new layer and create a solid color layer of pure white. And the way you can double check that is there should be 6 Fs in your hex code here. All your RGB values should be 255. Then you know it's going to be pure white across the board. You can hit OK and drag our stamp visible layer above our white layer. We're also going to have to create a drop shadow later, so I want to create a duplicate of that stamp visible layer as well. So now we're sitting with 2 stamp visible layers above a solid white layer. Let's turn off one of those layers, the lower of the layers. That's the one we're going to save for our drop shadow later, and we're just going to use this top one for our cutout. So let's come across to our pen tool again. It takes time to work out how to use the pen tool. You're going to start slowly, that's absolutely fine, but like I say, there's a ton of tutorials online about how to use it, but it really is worth taking the time to learn how to use the pen tool. It's better than your magic wand selection tools and your lasso tools. You're always going to have a bit of fringing, which is going to be unpleasant, and you're not going to have the control that you need to be able to cut it out cleanly, so it's best to work out how to use this pen tool. We're going to just hit a starting point here and create a node by left clicking there, and then move along a little bit, and we're going to click and drag to drag our curve out. And then I'm just going to hold Alt and grab this little point here with the circle, and that's going to just head off in the direction that I want to go to next. And I'm going to move around the product, just clicking and dragging and redirecting where I'm heading to next with that little circle, and just hold, click and drag. And then if I've made a little mistake, if it needs to be a slightly bigger curve, I'm going to hold Alt and just bend that curve back to where it needs to be. If I make a mistake with the node and it's way off over here, I'm just going to hold Control or Command, and I'm going to pull that back on. So you're going to head around, just take a little bit of time, because this is an important part of the process, and make sure that you're cutting your product out as cleanly as you can. So again, just go on, have a look online, find a pen tool tutorial, and make sure you take the time to practice and get really good at this kind of path creation is what it's called. It's going to give you a nice clean cutout when you get to that stage. So rather than watching me do this for a while, I'm going to speed this up for you as well. Okay, so as we're nearing the end here, just make these last couple of clicks. Try to curve around. When you get to that last point, if you hover over that first square there, you'll see a little circle appear, and all that means is that you're going to close your path now. So when I click on this square, my path closes, and if I zoom out, I can see I should have a bunch of these little lines and black squares all the way around my product. To cut it out now, all I need to do is mask it. And to do that, I just need to right click in the center of that selection and just go down to make selection, left click. Make sure my radius is feathered, so I usually use about 0.2, and all that does is just make sure that it's not a razor hard edge, because that doesn't look good to the eye. You won't see this feathering, it'll be too small, but it's just going to just soften the edge a little bit so it looks a little bit more realistic. Let's hit OK. We get a little line of marching ants going around. I'm just going to zoom in to show you what I've done. I've left all these fibers outside of that marching ants, as well as some of this hanging material, and that's how we're going to get rid of those little bits as well. So if we zoom out, to create the mask, we're going to come down to the bottom here and just hit our mask button. And what that's going to do is create a layer mask around our product. If we look at this little square on the right hand side here, this is our mask. Everything that's black on that mask is hidden, and everything that's white is revealed. And the reason you should rather use a mask instead of just deleting everything that's outside of that selection is because you can now edit it if you need to. If I wanted to reveal a little bit that I'd hidden, or something, an edge that wasn't looking quite good enough, what I can do is just grab my paintbrush tool, make sure that I'm changed to white here, and then with my mask selected, not the image selected, but the actual mask, I can go in anywhere on this image and I can paint stuff back from the background. And similarly, if I flip it to black, I can erase anything. So you can see how you can go and fine tune your edges, zoom right down, take out anything that where you've made a mistake. So let's just go back in our history to before those brush strokes. Now looking at the product on white, it was looking good on that sort of light grey background, but on white it's now looking a little bit dull. So what we can do is come in and we can add a levels layer above here. And just to make sure that our levels are only applied to our product, we can actually apply a mask to the levels that matches the mask for the product underneath by right-clicking on that layer and going to create clipping mask. And this means any selection or correction that I make is only going to apply to that selection underneath, which is just that product. So I think I could be just dragging my midtones up a little bit just to brighten it a touch so it fits in with that stark white background. Just my midtones in the middle here, just adding them, just pulling them a little bit through. I think the shadows are looking pretty good, and I think that's fine. Just that little tweak is going to add that extra punch to it. So just turning it on and off, you can see the difference we've made, just brightening it up a little bit. Okay, so now we want to, I mean, some people would just choose to leave it here, export, put it on the website just with white like this, and that's absolutely fine. Personally, I like to add a little bit of a drop shadow. And if you've managed to shoot your product with that clean white paper underneath, no footprints or scratches on it, but just a clean piece of white paper underneath, it should collect the shadow for you from your lighting that you can then use in this stage. So that's why we duplicated this layer twice. Now let's turn this layer back on. Let's first just label this layer shadow so you can see what we're doing here. Turn this layer back on, and it looks like everything's back to normal. And that's because we've got this whole layer underneath, and obviously on top we've got our cutout product, which is sitting over in place. Now what I want to do is I want to come up to the top here and change the blending mode of this shadow layer to darken. And it doesn't look like anything happens, but if I add a solid color layer underneath that shadow layer, you'll be able to see what we've done. So let's add a bright red, drag it underneath shadow there, and you can see what this darken blending mode does. It basically takes out everything of a tonal value higher than a certain point and leaves everything under that point in. So you can see we've got our shadow on that red, but we haven't got the background anymore. Everything's disappeared. Everything's darker than a certain color, so we've still got this light sedan sticking in. And we just really want that shadow underneath. So how are we going to do that? We're going to go to our shadow layer. I'm going to leave the red on just while I'm editing now so I can see what I'm doing. And that shadow layer, I'm going to apply a mask, and I'm going to fill that whole layer with black, just so that we can get rid of everything from the start, and we know it's all gone. So I've just filled that with black, and you can see it's all disappeared. Now what I want to do is just paint back in that shadow so that it appears on that layer. So to do that, I'm going to change my foreground color to white with that mask tool selected and go to my brush tool. Make sure it's a nice soft brush. At the moment we've got hardness 100. Let's take it right down to 0. And we want to just sort of bring our flow maybe down to 70% so we can slowly brush this in. Let's zoom in on the bottom part of this image here. And just with a sort of large-ish brush, let's just start to brush in our shadows here. So we can see we've got right underneath there, it's looking good. Don't want too much, just so that we can see where it's falling, and that's looking pretty good. Okay, if we zoom back out again, we can see on our layer mask exactly what we've done here. We've just revealed that shadow right underneath there with that white. Okay, let's get rid of, just turn off our red layer just by hitting the eye tool here. And it's looking a bit heavy, that drop shadow, so what we can do as well, it's a slightly darker grade than the rest. We can just go and create a levels layer right above that. So it's not going to apply, this levels layer isn't going to apply to the product above it, it's just going to apply to the shadow below. And just like we did before, we're going to right click and we're going to go to create clipping mask. And with that, it's just going to apply to the area that we've revealed. Everything else doesn't need touching anyway. And we're just going to take our highlight tool here and we're going to start to drag it across until it lightens that up, and there's a nice bleed between that between the bright white and those shadows. Let's put it right about here, and then we're going to drag our midtones to the left as well, just to lighten that shadow up a bit. And that is pretty much the most realistic sort of drop shadow you can get on your white background, because you've literally lifted it off your shot. So if we just do a stamp visible layer of everything that we've done now, select that top layer, Command Alt Shift E or Control Alt Shift E on a Windows computer to double check that everything all surrounding our product is white. Let's just click here on our foreground color, and we're going to get our eyedropper tool, and what we should be able to do is click all around the product here, and we should, and this these 6 F's here should not move, it shouldn't change. If we click in here, we see we get DE, DDE2, whatever, that's some gray. So we don't want that, we want this F all the way around. And if we click around the edges of our product all the way around here, we can see that we've got F, F, F everywhere we move around. And that means that if we put this image on a pure white website, it's going to have no borders, it's going to have no hard gray lines on the edge where it's slightly gray, and it's going to blend in seamlessly with your background. And that's looking pretty good. So we've got our image. We can make little tweaks from here. We can sharpen if we want. You can go through and you can start to pull your contrast a little bit. But I think we're looking pretty good. I would maybe make a slight levels adjustment at this point. Just maybe bringing up the highlights and just crunching those shadows down, bringing the midtones across. And I think that now is looking pretty good. So we can just go File, Save As, JPEG, and we'll name this Cutout. And that is pretty much ready to go on your website. You may need to resize for your particular site, but that I think as an image is going to work nicely as a product image. In the next episode, we're going to take a look at how we're going to take that material and recolor it to all your different color options.